So, good day, friends, and welcome to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and as you know, I'm your host. And before we begin today, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you for tuning in. I know what you're all doing. I know that you live your lives like I live my life. You're busy negotiating, getting kids to school, putting them to bed, feeding them, running around, getting them to activities, whether it be soccer or baseball or whatever it is. A lot of activities. I know that. So the fact that you've tuned into the show means a lot to me. So thank you. If you like what you hear, if you're being encouraged and you're learning things, I ask that you pass this around to your friends and family. We're building an audience, and we're building an audience for not for me, but for the people that I have on my show. And so, with that being said, it's a great pleasure to welcome to the Hamilton Review Dr. Beth Mosley. She's an author of a book called Happy Families. Her subtitle is How to Protect and Support Your Child's Mental Health. It's a great book, by the way, so we're going to talk about that in great detail. But Dr. Beth Mosley is a consultant clinical psychologist. She lives in London, and this conversation is via Zoom, and she is in London right now. So happy evening. Good evening to you over there. She's been working for over 20 years. She works in the UK's National Health Service. Her contributions to children's mental health during the pandemic were recognized in 2022. A New Year's honor list with an MBE, which means a member of the British Empire. Maybe she'll talk about that. It was bestowed by Prince Andrew?
Prince William.
Prince William, for exceptional contributions to the field of psychology. So, Dr. Beth Mosley, I am so honored to have a member of the British Empire on my podcast. I think you're the very first member of the British Empire I've ever had on my podcast. So we're breaking. This is history. So, Dr. Beth Mosley, welcome to the Hamilton Review.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very glad to be here.
So, as you know, you've listened to a couple of my podcasts. I like to begin my shows with essentially turning the microphone over to you and having you share a little bit about your background, where you're from, what you did as a kid, where you grew up, and more to the point, what kind of led you into the field of child psychology, and ultimately what prompted you to write this book, Happy Families. So from there, Beth, the microphone belongs to you.
Thank you. Well, I grew up in England. I've lived here all my life. I have lived a year of my life in America, which I can talk to. And I grew up in quite a deprived kind of place in Bristol, with being the eldest of 4 children. And my parents had me in what we consider these days when they were quite young, so they were 20. And I guess I am the first person in my family who went to university, went into higher education. So my experience of growing up was mixed, really. We had having siblings. I was always taking on the role of second parent or second mother, and I had some tough times at school. I was an awkward-looking child, and my parents moved around a lot, so I experienced quite a lot of bullying when I was growing up. And I did well enough at school, but I wasn't a massive high achiever. And it wasn't really until I went to university where I discovered my love of psychology. So that really just felt fit like a glove, really, for me. It came really naturally to me. Before I went to university, I spent a year being a nanny to a number of families in the military. And I traveled around America. I lived in Idaho for a while. I lived in California, and I lived in North Dakota. And I guess my passion for family and for young people and children has been present throughout my whole life, really. I've always ended up looking after children one way or another. And my experience of being a nanny in the States definitely kind of solidified that desire to work with families and children. So when I went and did psychology, I was really interested in child development, children's eyewitness testimony, and I went on to do a PhD in research around children's eyewitness testimony. And then I was tutoring students who were coming to me with all their problems in their houses, sharing milk and all the kind of issues they were facing. And I just suddenly had this moment where I thought, I really want to work with people, and young people in particular, struggling with their mental health. So I then went back and did another doctorate. So in the UK, the clinical psychology is a doctorate. And I went and studied clinical psychology for another 3 years, during which time I had my first child. And when I graduated, I went into the field of pediatrics. So I worked in a hospital in the UK, supporting young people who are facing the additional challenge of physical health difficulties alongside challenges with their mental health. And then my career just really flew from there. I went on to have 2 more children, got divorced along the way, and found out the challenge of juggling bringing up children as a single parent and co-parenting, because my children's father's still very involved with their lives, but we're doing that from 2 separate households, which brings its own challenges. And also trying to establish financial security for me and my children, as well as my career. And in that time, I've always been very innovative and thought outside of the box. I introduced a new way of delivering mental health support. So in the UK, we have specialist mental health services, which are provided by the National Health Service, which is something you don't have to pay for in the UK. So everybody in the UK accesses health and mental health care without needing to pay for it. But the challenge is that there are long waits. So if you've got a child who might be presenting with anxiety or depression, you might have to wait for a year to be seen by somebody to assess your child's needs. And then maybe another 6 months after that assessment, you would then get the treatment or the intervention or the support that you need. So one of the challenges is for mental health services, we're seeing young people 1 year to 18 months after the problem developed. And by that time, things have got much more difficult, much more embedded. And that means it's harder to provide support to those families. So in my work with families, quite often what I was doing with them and what I was sharing with them and helping make sense of their children's difficulties and how they could support their children, families were saying to me, gosh, if only we'd known this earlier, if only we could have understood what was going on for our child or adolescent, and we could have supported them with this information you're sharing with us now, then perhaps we wouldn't be sitting here 18 months on in the terrible situation we're in as a family. Because I'm sure any of your listeners will know that, if your children are struggling or in any way, but particularly with their mental health, and you're feeling very distressed and helpless as a parent and what to do and how to manage that, it creates a huge amount of stress within the family unit, as well. So it has a ricochet effect.
No, there's no question that mental illness at whatever level, whether it be just simply over anxiety or worry or depression, these things are gigantic. And really you really, especially in children, you want to try to intervene as soon as possible. So a year that is a long time. I mean, there's so much happens in a year in the life of a child, obviously. It represents a fairly large percentage of their actual life when you think about it.
Absolutely.
So,
and
yeah,
life
so
as well.
that's an issue, and I'm sure that was a frustration to you.
It was. So one of the reasons I got the honor of becoming part of the British Empire is I worked directly in a school where I provided early intervention support to young people presenting with that need, almost, immediately, and then developed a service from that so we could bring the NHS mental health services into schools so that we could provide that support early on, but not just the direct individual support to young people, but also support to the adults in young people's lives, and thinking about how can we change school culture with a whole school approach so that we're creating environments which are supportive of young people's mental health and teachers' mental health, and where we can be responsive to those needs rather than pathologizing them, and potentially referring them into services where they'll have to wait a long time to be seen. And one of the things that really struck me when I worked in the school, I used to see hundreds of young people a week. It was a real privilege. I absolutely loved that job. Is young people would come to me with the most horrific and sad stories that they were experiencing in their lives, and they would get the opportunity to tell me, a doctor, what was going on for them and how they were thinking and feeling. And they'd always end up with their dialogue. They'd always end with, "Is there something wrong with me?" or "What's wrong with me?" And quite often for these young people, I would just look at them and say, "There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. Everything that you're experiencing in terms of your feelings is a completely natural response to the challenges you're facing in life. You have been through so much adversity. You have faced so many challenges. And actually, to me, it's a wonder that you're at school today. You're in your classroom, you're managing to learn, you're managing to interact with your friends. This is incredible resilience in the face of the challenges you've experienced. And actually, if you were coming into me and telling me this story and saying you felt completely fine, I'd be really worried about you, because actually you shouldn't feel fine in the context of what you've just told me about what's going on in your life. And literally the faces of these young people, the relief that they'd shared this kind of secret fear or expression of their internal world, and I hadn't judged them. I hadn't said to them, "Yeah, absolutely, there's something wrong with you. You need a pill to get rid of that." And actually just really acknowledge their bravery and courage, and that the emotions are a very important part of telling them what's going on in their life. Literally transformative. And there's so many young people I had that conversation with, where there's lots of challenges with behavior in school, that after that one single conversation, their whole experience of school life changed. It was as if making sense of the problems and reframing themselves as brave and courageous in the face of the challenges that they were experiencing, and not holding on to the burden of these thoughts that were constantly going on over and over in their mind, which made them believe they were going mad. Sort of
Yeah.
gave these kids permission to re-engage with life, see themselves in a new light, and as a consequence, their behavior and their relationships with other people at school were completely transformed. And this is where I began to realize the power of being able to have these conversations with young people, and being able to make sense of their internal world. And the most wonderful thing is that the pastoral staff at school in the UK, we have teaching staff, but we now employ a lot of pastoral staff, because we recognise that a lot of the challenges young people are facing in school around learning are because of their struggles with anxiety or low mood, or their mental health, or their family situation. I would I would supervise and support the pastoral staff to have a better understanding and psychological knowledge of young people,
Sure.
and they could have those similar conversations. And literally we were able to show over, it was a school of 2000, community of 2000, a high school, so age in the UK, that's age 12 to 18.
Yeah.
We were literally able to transform the whole entire school community in terms of the young people's well-being went up, the staff well-being went up, and we had groups running. So we had anxiety management lessons running for young people struggling with anxiety. They'd come to those rather than maths and English, 6 to 8 weeks, evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was just such a powerful way of working. And there was no pathologizing, there was no stigmatizing. People would come up to me in the corridors and be, "Oh, Miss Doctor, you've got to meet my friend. They're struggling with their mood as well." And it was incredible. And the number of young people who were able to access early support and then thrive. Um, so really that led me to writing my book, because so many parents, and I ran a parent workshop program, and we ended up running that through the pandemic to support parents, because pretty much they became their child's entire world, didn't they? And needed
Yeah.
that help navigating that. So we ran a parent workshop, and we had nearly 100,000 parents attend these. They're on Eventbrite, and they're bookable actually from anyone across the world. American people can join them. And one of the things that I discovered through the process of delivering these early workshops was that if I was honest about my own challenges as a parent, if I said, you know what, I've had the most awful morning with my daughter, my poor daughter, she's in the book a lot because I've got three children, and my daughter in the middle has been, we've had some interesting challenges over the years, probably because we're so similar. Um, and I would be very honest with the audience about my own struggles to apply what I knew and, you know, I knew I should be doing, but it was so difficult to do as a parent with all of the struggles that we're facing, all the demands we're facing as parents. And I remember this one particular event. I was quite nervous about it actually, because I had a big group of parents, and I could see all of their faces, just that apprehension of, you are going to make me feel like a bad parent today. I already feel bad enough as a parent, because I think we're prone to feeling very guilty and responsible for our children's whatever's going on for them, really.
Sure. No,
Um,
so true. Yeah.
so
So
just
sorry.
being able to
Yeah.
basically say, you know, I haven't got this right, and this is my struggle today. And at the end, the parents stood up and started an applause and said, "Thank you for being so honest with us today about how hard you find parenting, because it's enabled me to let go of the level of guilt and that kind of hard shell I put on when I come to things like this, preparing myself to feel worse about myself as a parent." And from there on in, I thought, I need to be honest with people about how difficult this is. And so my book is really not just written from the perspective as a professional, but also as a parent, to kind of
Yeah.
ensure that anyone who's reading it doesn't feel criticized or judged or blamed, but instead just feels like, you know, I really get it, you know, and we can't be perfect as parents. We need to make mistakes to prepare our children for the world, and there's some relief in that. It frees you up in lots of ways.
No, I love that story. I read it and I thought, you know what, just your transparency with these group of parents, and I think that they would, when you go into that kind of a session, you're kind of expecting maybe the ball to drop or something, they're gonna feel condemnation possibly from you, but the fact that you opened up in such a transparent way, sharing with them how an event that you have with your kids, and listen, I'm a parent, you know that, Beth, and now I'm a grandparent, and we all were this world. I mean, you make a comment, and I love what you say here. You make a comment that life is complex. You wrote that in your introduction. Life
Mm,
is complex. That is so true. I mean, we live, things are not linear. They're oftentimes anything but linear, and certainly raising children. And your confession, very from the very beginning, you say, "I have not been a perfect parent." Amen to
mm,
that. And I think that none of us, I think, in this process of parenting, can look ourselves and be honest and say, "I've been a perfect parent." I think we've all failed in one way or the other. And I think that when people admit that, especially as a professional, especially as someone whose business it is to
mm.
share ideas and thoughts of dealing with mental issues, it does kind of take away some of that sense of anxiety from those who you're sharing it with. You talk about um, you talk about a lot. I mean, but one of the things you're talking about is mental health, is actually something that we see issues with mental health early on in life. You gave a statistic that I was unfamiliar with. You say that 75% of mental health issues begin before the age of 25. That's a big number, 75%. And you also
Mhm.
say that even actually 50%, 50% of mental health issues actually begin to manifest themselves before age 15. So you're really talking about, you want early intervention. The earlier, the better, is really what you're trying to say here, I think. And I can't agree more. You kind of get a flavor of who a person's going to be when they're younger, right? One way or the other, their personalities kind of begin to manifest themselves. Um, you talk about, the what are some of the mental well-being, and you enumerate several of them: commitment to others, or in connection with others, physical activities, taking notice of things, keep learning, and live and giving. Let's kind of talk about those. These are kind of ways in which you can preserve, I think, or at least try to develop good, healthy mental health. So let's I'd like, if you would, just kind of talk about number one, connecting with others. Why is that important?
So I think this is something we often don't appreciate and realize, but connection with others is actually the biggest predictor of both physical and mental health positive outcomes. And so our relationships in our social world is entirely critical to all of us throughout our entire life. And I guess as human beings, we are social creatures. We do need other people to survive and thrive. And particularly as children who are going to be dependent on those main caregivers. And I talk in the book about it takes a village to raise a child. So there will be people in your child's life who are exceptionally important in supporting them develop and grow and learn how to interact with other people and learn how to feel loved and be loved and to love, how to express emotions, to feel emotions, how to manage the challenges that they're facing. And so, of course, for children, those critical relationships, which will include their parents and carers and other potential family members, other members of the community who they might spend time with. We know that for young people who face lots of adversity in their life, it takes one trusted adult to be protective of really poor outcomes in life. We're talking about job outcomes, relationship outcomes, health outcomes. So, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a parent. And I think that's a really important thing to hold in mind, particularly for those young children who might not have access to that level of parental care that we would love to have for all young people. So that adult, that teacher, or that professional in the school environment could be that single trusted adult who is going to make the difference for that young person in terms of their future. And I've certainly seen that in the schools I've worked in. Young people who've had really difficult home circumstances, things that have been really hard for parents to give their children emotionally, and stability that they've not been able to offer those children. That trusted adult in the school environment has really been able to make a huge difference to that child's life. So our community is integral to our health and well-being. And so as we think about how we're bringing children up, understanding who are the key important people in their life, and as they progress into being teenagers, that becomes their peer group. And we know friendship and social acceptance in peer groups for teenagers is critically important. And the brain changes that are happening in those teenage years actually mean that teenagers prioritize what their friends think about them over what adults think about them, which can influence their decision making about what they do next, because
Yeah.
they'll go to the party and maybe get drunk and not worry about the consequences of what their parents care about, as because it's more important for them in that moment to fit in with their peer group. So, as we are progressing through our children's lives, we've got to support them navigate these different stages where our role is going to shift and change. And that's really difficult as parents, because for some of us, we'll be so concerned about the outcomes for our children, and we'll want to have a huge level of involvement in our children's lives, and that can feel very difficult when as teenagers they push back on that. It can feel a very difficult balance to strike. And for other parents, we maybe find the early years more demanding on us because we don't have the resources to give our children quite what they need physically and emotionally.
Sure.
So I think it's complicated, isn't it? I think you pointed out, I said in my book, we don't come to parenting as a blank canvas. We all have our own experience of being parented. We have things about our own childhood that we maybe want to repeat and give our children a similar experience. And we have things from our own childhood that we maybe really don't want to repeat and we want to protect them from. And often, most parents I meet are wanting their children to have the things that they didn't have, and to kind of, they have hopes and dreams for their children that perhaps make up for some of the things that they didn't experience in their own lives. So there's a high amount of pressure and expectation on us as parents. So whenever we see something going wrong for our children, or whenever we start worrying about the behaviors our children are showing us, we can sometimes react in a way that can be disproportionate to what we're seeing in front of us. And sometimes we can unintentionally reinforce some of the difficulties just because our own anxiety is so big for the right reasons, because we absolutely want the best for our children.
Yeah, so true. Um, no, I think that when you made a comment just a moment ago about we don't come into parenting as a blank canvas. We are anything but that. We were raised in a family. We were in that milieu, that environment that we grew up in, where with siblings or or not with siblings, with parents who were less than perfect, of course. Let's be honest, and I know I've done this myself. There are times where I will say something and I realize that that's exactly what my mother would have said, or that's exactly what my father would have said. I mean, literally the utter, the words, and they kind of
Yeah,
come out and they're hidden in our subconscious mind, for better or for worse. I mean, certainly everything my mom and dad share with me as a young boy growing up was not bad. I mean, they said many things which were very good to me. And I will say those things are some of the things that they did say were not so good. And we all know that exactly what I'm talking about. So we do kind of come with this uh, preformed idea of what parenting is, and then we have children, and our children are not us. they're very
no, they're
they're
not.
very they're very different people, and they manifest their independence. Certainly, when you what you're referring to, these teenage years, when they begin to pull away and to begin to steer more toward their peer group, which, by the way, is normal, and which
Yeah,
I think you would agree is a healthy thing. And
yes,
we
absolutely.
obviously want the peer group that they're gravitating toward to be a peer group that we would endorse. Kids
Hmm.
who are doing things which are positive, or at least we hope and pray that. And but this parenting thing is tough. You talk about, so connecting is important. You make a big issue about physical activity. Can you kind of elucidate that a little bit?
Yeah, so when I talk in my book about well-being, I've created this concept around the well-being abacus as a way to kind of help us understand what the seven main key areas that we know research tell us are the things that are protective of good mental health. So as you said, connection with others is one of the most sort of the strongest ones. Then physical activity and nutrition, sleep, noticing now, learning something new, and giving are the other six. And I think quite often our children are growing up in a world where some of these elements of what we know is very important for our well-being are being interfered with by, I guess, the context within which they're living. So physical activity is absolutely for some children a real challenge, just purely because of the increase of screen-based activities, which mean a lot of children get less opportunity to play outside and engage in physical activity. And we know actually that depression and anxiety has that physical activity has a more profound impact on depression and anxiety, positive impact, than taking an antidepressant or an SSRI. So actually, a lot of young people that I've worked with who struggled with low mood and anxiety, as part of what we've been working on with them, it has been about increasing their level of physical activity. But what we try to do is we try to increase it in that physical activity that's meaningful to them. So working out what they are going to see as pleasurable and meaningful. For some young people, team sports are a really valuable, important way of having connection with others, giving because they're with their teammates, and also engaging in that physical activity. And then other young people, like my youngest son, he does enjoy football, but what he absolutely loves at the moment is mountain biking, and building jumps in the garden. And so for him, his physical activity is with his friends on their bikes, engaging in cycling. And, my ex-husband and myself have to find ways to support him to do that, because it's a much harder activity to do, which requires less supervision as well. So typically, I let my 12, 13-year-old go out on his own on his bike. And I know for some families that's not possible depending on where you live. And in the States, I don't know, it depends on your neighborhood, I guess. But lots of families in the UK wouldn't allow their children out on their own on their bike because they'd be worried about risks. So some of the things that we struggle to encourage our children to do with physical activity are based on the fact that it depends on us getting them to a place to do that physical activity or us supervising them out on their bike. And I think what we appreciate as parents is we often don't have the time. So what that leads to us is our children probably spending more time in their bedrooms on their devices because we don't need that level of adult supervision. Obviously, Jonathan Haidt talks about in The Anxious Generation about allowing and encouraging children to spend more time unsupervised in play and taking risks. But again, that requires a different mindset, doesn't it? And can be difficult practically. So yeah, physical activity is integral really to keeping the body processing those stress chemicals and keeping healthy.
Sure. I mean, I listen, our bodies are meant to move. I mean, historically, we were moving. We were out in the fields. We were plowing fields. We were doing things. We were active. We were hunting. We were whatever we were doing. We certainly weren't sedentary out on the farm, right? I mean, we spent our life
No.
trying to survive. And so I think that yeah, this new paradigm certainly, and you speak, you have a whole chapter on screens. We can get to that in a second, but I do think that that's one of the most important things I tell my patients on a day-by-day basis is what are you doing physically, and in particular, and I think my families out there listening right now know that I feel strongly about this. What are you doing every day to make your heart go tick, 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 tick? To get that, to get a healthy heart rate going, so you're doing something every day to keep your body moving. You mentioned also, and this is two other things which I think are just common sense, but sleep and nutrition. Tell us about why sleep is important.
Sleep is integral really to all of our recovery at nighttime to enable our brains to process critical information and our bodies to go through the process of kind of detoxing and healing. So when we don't get enough sleep, our brains literally do not work as they're intended to. There's a part of our brain called the amygdala, which is a kind of danger center. And when we don't get enough sleep, this applies to adults too, our amygdala becomes more sensitive to threat. And so we find, and you all know this yourself, if you had a terrible night's sleep, you'll find yourself being a lot more triggered the following day by things because that kind of part of the brain is more hypersensitive to potential threats. And so for children who are, it's a bit of a chicken and egg because we know children who are struggling with anxiety and low mood also tends to have an impact on their sleep, which then unfortunately compounds the challenges with the anxiety and the low mood because it's not allowing the body and the brain to recover. And we've discovered in the UK that we've done quite a lot of research in this space that actually quite a lot of the young people that come into specialist mental health services, if you just get their sleep well, if you just get them sleeping well enough, it actually the other mental health difficulties completely clear up.
Yeah.
So actually it's one of those things that I talk to in the book and give some practical tips really because all of our children are different. Some of our children like to go early birds and some are night owls. My youngest is a night owl, so we've had to think about his sleep routine so he doesn't lie in bed for 2 hours getting anxious about the fact he can't go to sleep because quite often if we spend a lot of time in bed not sleeping, we associate being in bed with not sleeping and then we can't get to sleep and then that creates this kind of cycle of feeling anxious about going to bed. So sleep is a critical part of staying healthy and well for both adults and children, but particularly in those developmental years.
Yeah. You mentioned nutrition, you talk about magnesium, you talk about omega fatty acids.
Yeah.
Speak to that as well, because I'm not sure that people really think that much about magnesium in particular.
Yes, so we know that these nutrients are critical to brain development and also supporting of the balance in our brain, which reduces the probability of inflammation in the nervous system and that propensity to kind of hypersensitivity to stress. So there are some things that it's really difficult for us to get within the modern day diet, which means that we quite often, if your child is not going to eat lots of green leafy vegetables and pulses and grains, then you might need to look at a supplement for that. But I think one of the really interesting things about the omega-3 research is that they actually gave omega-3 to juvenile delinquents, so young people who were in prison as children. And they actually gave them a dose of this omega-3, and they found that that actually reduced the delinquent behavior and was a more powerful effect than any other intervention that they provided, whether it was therapy or any other behavioral intervention. So there's lots of research into the space around trying supporting the brain to have access to those fatty acids. And again, it's really difficult to get those in our diet because that comes from oily fish, and we don't tend to eat sardines, mackerel, and salmon regularly in our diets in the way that perhaps our ancestors might have done. So there are some elements of nutritional supplements that you can consider. I think the other really important thing about that is new in the area, and I don't know if you've had anyone on your podcast yet, is about the gut microbiome. So there's lots and lots more research about having rich gut microbiome, which is really protective for the whole immune system and the nervous system. And there's lots of links with young people who are neurodivergent, so who might have a diagnosis of ADHD, autism, who have a very limited gut microbiome. And when they do a gut microbiome biopsy, so they put good, healthy gut microbiome from one person into a child who hasn't, they see a complete transformation, a lot of the symptoms of difficulty associated with that diagnosis of autism or ADHD. So I think, again, this is an area that we're really beginning to understand just how much our physical health and what we're putting into our bodies is having an impact on how our brains are working.
Yeah, so nutrition is important. Yeah, the microbiome is something that I think we don't totally understand. It's very complex, actually, and is something. And I have had people on my show talking about the microbiome. I think that the body is you say life is complex, the body's complex too. I think that we're scratching the surface of some of these things, and hopefully we'll get some clarity as the days come by. You mentioned another way of preventing mental, just maintaining or preserving mental well-being is giving. I thought that was sweet, and I do think that I think Jesus himself said it's better to give than receive. I kind of believe in that myself. But why is giving such a powerful thing?
So giving actually produces lots of really amazing neurochemicals that feel great. So oxytocin is one of those neurochemicals. So we know that if we just watch other people be in receipt of kindness or an act of giving, that in itself produces really positive neurochemicals in us. So just observing and witnessing that actually makes us feel better within ourselves. But there's something about the act of giving which helps us both feel like we're making a contribution to someone else, and improves our sense of self-esteem, our sense of agency. So by giving to someone else, you're seeing a positive impact of a behavior on someone else. And a lot of young people that I work with who struggle with their mental health is they have a real sense of learned helplessness. They feel like everything they do is kind of not going to lead to a positive outcome, or they're pretty kind of helpless in the world. And by giving, you're actually kind of having a ricochet effect where you're learning to see the impact on another. So I think there's lots of really important things about giving, which and being kind to others, acts of kindness, and again, thinking about gratitude, the practice of gratitude. So one of the things I've often done with my own children is at meal times, rather than saying, how's your day been, ask the question, what are you grateful for today? And actually, you can stimulate some really interesting conversations at the table. We are programmed, our brains are very focused on noticing the negatives. And I talk a lot about this in my chapter on anxiety and worry. As human beings, to survive, we need to be on the lookout for danger. So our brains are very, very programmed to notice the things that put us at risk or notice the negative. And a lot of the young people I work with who are struggling with anxiety, they are constantly on the lookout for the negative and noticing the things that are going wrong. And actually, we can train our brains. That's the beautiful thing. I talk about neuroplasticity in the book. So even as adults, we can train our brains, but particularly when we have children and teens, they've got very neuroplastic brains, which means they're very flexible and adaptable and can learn lots. So if you're helping your children think about the things that they're grateful in a meaningful way, rather than you should be grateful for your dinner. There are children in other parts of the world who have no dinner tonight. That's probably not the tone, which I think I probably got as a child, but just
Yeah.
kind of helping us appreciate the small things. And that goes and fits in with noticing now how much of time in our lives are we not paying attention to what's happening in the moment because we're thinking about what's going to happen next or worrying about what's just happened before. And we know that teaching our children, and lots of children do this very naturally, that being in the moment and noticing the color of the sky or the leaves on the tree or just, the fact we're warm today because we could be cold. So we often do 5 things you're grateful for at bedtime. And it can be the simplest of things. It can be the fact I'm in my bed and I'm warm, the fact I don't feel hungry tonight, the fact I read a story with you, whatever it might be. And I think these things are helping us to balance our minds so that we are focusing not just on the risks and challenges of life, but we're also focusing on, the privileges and opportunities that we
Yeah.
have.
They're the good things of life. You made a very sweet comment in your introduction. You're talking about sometimes you look at old pictures, and I think we want to finish up our conversation with this. But you talk about looking at old pictures, and sometimes you reflect and say, "Was I too busy just trying to make it through the day? Was I too busy just in engaged in the problems of the day to savor?" And I think that's the word, to like really kind of, it's like when you taste the good ice cream or whatever it may be, you want to savor it for a moment rather than
Mm.
gobble it down. You just kind of go, this is so good. How do and I think we all, that comment, and when I read that in your book, that kind of hit me, because I think that in the process of trying to raise 6 kids, I can tell you that me personally, I did kind of hurry through a lot of things. How do you, what is your comment to parents about taking that moment to savor the goodness and the delight of childhood itself?
It's such a nice thing for you to have noticed because it's probably the thing I think we as parents regret. My eldest is now 20 and at university, and I see so little of him compared to when I used to see him every single day. And I think as your children grow and you start to realize that you're never going to have this time again, I think you become even more aware of the preciousness of the moment. But the challenge is, you've still got to get everything done for the day. You're still exhausted and tired yourself, aren't you? And even though you know this in the moment, sometimes it can be very, very hard to hold on to that. And I think one of the things that I've tried to learn to do more of as I've gone through parenthood is to show myself some compassion and recognize that quite often the thing I'm trying to get to is where I'm already at. I just don't realize it. So I feel like we're all trying to get to our kids being happy, tucked up in bed, safe, warm, and actually the moments that we're often in with our family and our children, this is it. My son, when he went to university, he was telling us about some challenges with a flatmate that they had. And I sort of said, "Oh, how have you dealt with that?" And he had dealt with it, no problem at all. And he said, "Mom, all those family holidays that went wrong, where we had all of these, because we go on big family holidays with our extended family, and there'd be all these moments in the holiday where you think, this has gone wrong. We've invested so much energy in having the perfect holiday, and it's not the perfect holiday. Everything's in chaos. We're dealing with this problem and that problem." He said, all of those moments meant that I've been able to deal with this situation exceptionally well. And it just really struck me as a parent that we spend so much time trying to get things right, trying to make sure things go right for us and our children, and that we have the perfect day at the seaside, or we have the kind of lovely family meal where everyone's happy and enjoying the food we've prepared. But actually, the things that are often going to enable our children to manage the challenges of life as they go into adulthood are going to be how we navigated the tricky stuff, how we managed it when things didn't quite go to plan, how we managed it when, actually I couldn't cope with the day and I had to apologize to my kids that night and say, "I'm really sorry that I, completely lost the plot with all of you and I wasn't able to, be the mom I want to be. I'm just really struggling at the moment. I'm going to try better tomorrow." All of those moments actually are the things that have enabled my son to be a well-balanced, well-rounded adult. And so that helps me now, A, savor the moment, even if the moment isn't quite what I anticipated it might be or wanted it to be. And B, appreciate that it's more about how we manage the challenges we're facing. I guess how we kind of take responsibility for that. Like, one of the big things young people always say to me is, when their parents apologize to them for something they got wrong, it's a truly wonderful moment for them as a young person to see the humbleness and the acknowledgement, but also to feel that their parent has allowed themselves to be vulnerable enough to own something. And then it enables them as a young person to also take responsibility and accountability for the part that they might have played in this event that has happened. It teaches them about the power of sorry and apology. And I think the key thing I've learned is I have not got it right a lot of the time. I've got it right enough. And what I want my children to believe is, if they get it wrong, I still love them. If they get it wrong, people around them will respect and value them because of who they are, and because they've probably got the grace and the willingness to be open to perhaps acknowledging where they might have done better or got it wrong. So I've reframed getting it wrong, and to enable me to not be so distressed about the complexity of life, the challenges my children and I might face. And in the process, I can see this is working out okay, because my children are getting to adulthood and they're making exceptionally balanced, empathic, non-judgmental young people who take responsibility and accountability for themselves. And I think so there's something there really about acknowledging how we're all humans, and the more we understand ourselves, and I think that's what my book does, it helps you understand yourself better. And then through that process, you can come to your children's challenges, or what you're seeing your children with, a curiosity rather than a fear and anxiety. And that curiosity opens up opportunities for connection. And that connection provides opportunities for growth. Not only your growth as in your relationship, but also that young person's growth in themselves, because they can make sense of what they're feeling, why it matters to them. And from there, they can make good choices about what they need to do next to honor what's important to them as young people, as they're learning and growing about themselves and the world.
Excellent. I mean, for those listening, if you only tuned into what Beth had just said, you you learned a great nugget, which is parental humility and parental willingness to acknowledge that you don't always have it together. And we've all had days like that where we just kind of go, oh man, this wasn't a good day. But as your son told you, some of those moments were the actual moments that he remembers, and they were a point of reference for him to navigate some difficult times too. Well, listen, Dr. Mosley, you have been a phenomenal guest. I want to restate the name of her book. I'm going to hold it up for those who are watching on YouTube. The name is Happy Families. The subtitle is How to Protect and Support Your Child's Mental Health. This is a very, very readable. It's an excellent book. I recommend that those of you who are dealing with parenting, whether you're struggling or not, this will give you a little bit more ammunition to face day-by-day challenges, because parenting is filled with challenges. So, Dr. Mosley, thank you for taking your time to be on the Hamilton Review today. You were an excellent guest.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
And those listening, thank you for tuning into this podcast. I wish you all well. Again, the name of the book is Happy Families. Beth Mosley spells her name Mosley. She's a PhD, and she's also a member of the British Empire. So there you go. So for those listening, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.